So now the vote has been taken. We're in 1975. Is this the point at which you get involved? And what else happens in that year before we get to the first contract?
Well, several things happened. There was an initial vote to ask the NLRB to certify us. We win that. Then we hold the election. To the best of my recollection, that was in the late fall of 1975. And we win that overwhelmingly. And so we're getting ready to bargain the first contract. Meanwhile, however, two things happen. One is I'm coming up for tenure. This is my tenure year. And I had been asked by a group of the probationary faculty, that is non-tenured faculty. Let me back that up. There was a meeting of the probationary faculty in which they asked several people to run for union office. Their concern, quite reasonably, was that the senior faculty, when they bargained a contract, would protect their own rights and privileges and would sell out the younger and less secure faculty. I'm pleased to say that's never, ever been the case with the union under 3 administrations, but I understand the worry about it. And so the probationary faculty held a meeting and asked several people if they would run for union positions on the policy board and the executive board, which is the 5-member executive group of the union that had just been, the bylaws had just been hammered out. And they asked me if I would run for executive board. I've never understood why. I didn't have any particular prominence on campus. I was nobody coming up for tenure, but something, maybe it was my long hair and weird pants or something, but they said, would you run for executive board? I said, I can't possibly win, but sure. So we had the election, and the leading 4 members of the executive board won by overwhelming margins. And for the 5th position, mine, I won by 3 votes over one of my colleagues who actually was a librarian. So that's how I got on the executive board. And now I'm in the leadership, and this is where my memory of what happens in the union is much sharper, because I was present. I had really been outside. I had written a letter earlier on endorsing the formation of a union, but that was the extent of my involvement before. Now I'm in it. And so now we have to hammer out our bargaining demands, not really knowing what those should look like or what they were, or how you did this, but Mr. Van Borg helped us considerably. Meanwhile, in December of 1975, an all-faculty meeting is called by the administration on what has since come to be called Black Friday in December of 75. And we are informed that the university is in terrible financial trouble. It turns out that's true. And it had a long time getting out of it because the planning had been so poor and there was virtually no endowment and virtually no sophisticated budgeting. The university was not ready to be in the 1970s, but there they were, without the money to do so. And so therefore, they were notifying all 111 of the 280 full-time faculty, all 111 probationary faculty out of the 280 total, that they were receiving layoff notices in the next week. Now, they weren't really going to fire all of us, they said, but because of the timely notice provision, they had to lay everybody off, and they'd tell us sometime later who was really getting fired and who was going to come back. As you may imagine, pandemonium set in. And I clearly remember one of my senior colleagues, a sociologist, Ralph Lane, standing up and shaking his finger at the academic vice president and saying, shame, shame, shame. And those who had been sitting on the fence about unionism, this pushed an awful lot of people into our camp because this was, of course, an outrageous action. So now we generate our bargaining proposals and we go to the bargaining table, and the president shows up and says, I don't really approve of this, but perhaps something good will come of it, and blessed us and left. And none of us had asked him to come bless us, but anyway. And we start bargaining, and our attorney says the first thing we need to know is the layoff list. That is, who are you really laying off of the 111 who've got notices? They said, well, we don't know yet. And he said, well, how many do you think you're laying off? He said, we think about 60. He said, but you don't have the list. No. Well, we're not going to bargain, but we've got a great salary improvement for you. And our attorney said, we're not going to bargain with you until we know how many people you plan to lay off. We're not going to bargain a salary increase over the bodies of our fired co-workers. So when you know how many you intend to lay off, you let us know, or we'll call you. So a week or two later, they called us, and we came back to the table. Do you have the layoff list? No, not yet. He says, well, you called us. Well, I know, but we'd like to bargain because we got this great salary increase. How many do you think you're going to lay off? About 40. Call us when you have the names. Don't call us before then. Out. And we're, meanwhile, all quivering. Especially those non-tenured, and there were just 2 or 3 of us on the bargaining team who were on the layoff list. The original, that is, who had been given notices. So they called us back again 1, 2, 3 weeks later. Do you have the layoff list? Yes. How many are on it? 26. So already we've saved 85 jobs, plus or minus, or helped to do that. And he shoves the list across the table. And I am at that time the secretary of the bargaining committee, and I'm taking notes. And Mr. Van Borg skims the layoff list quickly and says, well, I'm glad to see none of my people are on the list. And I'm sitting next to him, pulling on his sleeve and pointing at my name on the list. What? Well, long story short, I remained on the layoff list. I was out of work for 9 months. Ultimately, my job was restored by an arbitrator with full back pay. The term of art for that is making you whole, but you're never made whole. That's an experience that you have to go through to be unemployed, to feel like maybe your whole professional career is over and the thing you've been aiming at for so many years you may or may not ever be able to practice again. And you feel unwanted, and you feel alone, and you feel angry, and it's not a... Many people, of course, get unemployed in academia and elsewhere. I empathize with them. It does not feel good, but it came out okay, but you can't undo the damages. Anyway...
How many were ultimately fired?
Of the 26, we were able to get restored to work for the university approximately 20. Now, not all of them were restored to their original positions. Some were given half-time work. Some were given administrative work. One guy had to work in the bookstore, for example. Not so much fun, but he had a job anyway. And only about 4 or 5 or 6 we were not able to do anything for. One of them, for example, had another full-time job I believe as a firefighter. So it was hard to argue for him on an economic basis. But we were able to, we lost 15 academic jobs, and of those 15, about half had some other job given to them. So we, at some level, felt that we'd succeeded already, although we obviously felt terrible about the folks we weren't able to save. My job was saved because there was a provision that those who had been denied tenure would automatically have access to binding arbitration. I was denied tenure, even though all the committees recommended positively. The university said, no, we're denying tenure. And so I, along with 2 others, got access to arbitration.
Okay, now tell us how the negotiations went. What were the issues and what was fought about, and how did it turn out?
Well, the issues were everything, because we were bargaining everything. We were essentially, every university has a faculty handbook. We put the whole faculty handbook on the table and said, we want this in the contract, we want academic freedom in the contract, we want tenure provisions and tenure rights in the contract, we want professional rights and responsibilities in the contract. We want the bookstore, the library, we want everything in the bargaining agreement because we want it protected, because we'd seen that the university was perfectly capable of disregarding what it had committed itself to in a faculty handbook or elsewhere. It's, well, it doesn't count because circumstances had changed. We wanted a document that they couldn't unilaterally decide they're going to tear it up. And that, of course, is the chief difference between having a unionized faculty and having a faculty, even a powerful faculty with all kinds of consultation rights, is there is always a clause in a faculty handbook that says this handbook may be changed at will by the board of trustees or by the university, whatever. I'm unaware of any faculty handbook that doesn't say that.
Right.
Well, a bargaining contract doesn't say that.
Right.
It has to be bargained.
And if the administration violates the CBA, then there's a whole set of
Well, there's
procedures.
grievance and arbitration, which we had to bargain for. We didn't have that before. Now, as it happens, the university hired a man, John Scalone, to bargain for them, not a well-educated or refined man, had worked for the canneries and so forth as a management negotiator and labor expert, and I can remember him holding up a letter that the AAUP had written protesting the treatment of faculty at USF.
Just say what AUP is.
Sorry, the American Association of University Professors, which is the mostly non-union setter of standards for academe. For example, they provide salary and compensation data for all member universities every year, and that's been very helpful. And they, over the years, starting in the 40s, they set out the standards that they wanted to see and believed in for tenure and for promotion and for scholarly support and so on and so forth. So they've been a very valuable professional organization. In collective bargaining, they don't do so well and haven't had a big role in that, but that's another matter. So anyway, they wrote a letter to the university saying, how can you treat your faculty this way? It's unprofessional and so on. And the university's bargainer at the table, their chief negotiator, held up the letter and said, and who is this AAUP anyway? So he was not vetted in university matters, but he was a very tough bargainer, and he believed in the process. Mm-hmm. And so it wasn't too hard to get grievance and binding arbitration bargain. When the university figured out that he'd done that on their behalf, they were livid, but it was too late. The contract was in place. And that, of course, has saved us, because a contract that you cannot enforce is no good at all. It's no good if they do it most of the time, except when they feel like not.
So is this what they call the industrial model?
Well, part of it was grievance and arbitration doesn't have to be industrial model, but much of the contract was, that is, management manages and labor grieves. Right. And when faculty figured that out, they were upset. They didn't want to be labor. They wanted to be partners. And we said, we've tried that one. They don't want partners. They want subordinates. They want to run the university. If you want a voice, it's going to have to be this way. Right. Now, as it turned out, 5 years down the line, that may have saved our union, that we had a largely industrial model contract. It is not a perfect way to govern a university. It simply is not. Mm-hmm. And it's been modified dramatically over the 30 years since then. But at the time, it was management manages and labor grieves, and that ended up saving us, I think.
So the contract then was eventually agreed to. How long did it take to get signatures on that?
On the contract? I don't recall.
It went for months, I assume. It wasn't right away. I mean,
no. We're bargaining the invention of the new university. It took forever. Right. And at one point, there was a strike authorization vote taken when the university balked at some of the provisions, not money, by the way, other provisions. And we went back to the table, and eventually we reached a contract that was acceptable. We wanted a longer-term contract. The university always wanted to bargain every year, feeling at the beginning that it was going to be destabilizing for us to do it and we'd give up and go away. Mm-hmm. As a practical matter, it worked the other way. But
do you remember so these were one-year contracts?
Early on, yeah. One of them, I think, was a 2-year contract, but it's hard. You're now asking me about things that happened nearly 40 years ago, so it's not all vivid for me.
Do you remember what the salary increase was, or around?
It was a reasonably high increase given where we were. I think it was an 8 or 10% increase, so we were brought back into shouting range of other universities in those days. Our mantra used to be, our mantra used to be, oh, dear God, let us someday catch up with the California State University salary scale. Well, I'm sorry to say that, I'm glad to say for us, right, and I'm sorry for California, that we have left the California state scale in the dust. We're now in line with where we ought to be with the major universities in the state. We were way behind in 1975. We caught up a little that one year, but it was a struggle every year. And part of the thing we didn't get was that there's also a salary step. Each faculty member gets a small increase every year until she or he reaches the top step of that rank, and then you're stuck there. Then you get only the cost of living increase unless and until you get promoted, and then you got a few more steps, and there are only 3 ranks and a few steps.
So in lieu of a one-time pay increase,
Right.
you divide it into pieces.
Correct. So there's cost of living increase and there's a step increase. We understood that we had bargained for both. It later, when we got the contract, a little bit like the BART system now, when the contract came out, except the workers had made the mistake. We didn't have the step that first year, and we were very angry at our chief negotiator, and he said it's my fault, and I thought we had it too, but I signed off on it and so forth. So we missed the step that year, but we preserved the system, and so the steps kicked back in.
I see. So you had steps written into it, but it was somewhere there wasn't language saying you get the step.
Right. When they said the 1970, 76, 77 increase shall be, the steps weren't mentioned. We thought they were explicit, but it turns out not. So
That's why Eric Ewan, the librarian, always says, and steps
That's right.
every time we bargain.
that's
Okay.
right. That's right.